one of the things I alluded to earlier was the anti-Muslim hostility definition. Now, this has come in. It's not illegal. It's not a criminal offence to fall foul of this definition, but it is statutory in the sense that it will apply to all public bodies. The private sector is encouraged to sign up to this. So falling foul of something that's considered to be anti-Muslim hostility could lead to job losses and kind of more civil penalties. Brendan, the government has been at pains to insist that this will have absolutely no impact on free speech. I find that completely risible. It seems as if how could the intention be anything other than to silence speech and silence criticism and questioning of particularly Islam and Islamic extremism and Islamism, which are such important and controversial topics of our time.
Absolutely. It's just a new word for Islamophobia. It's interesting because I was reading the government document and because it's published its new definition of anti-Muslim hostility, and then this accompanying document as well. And it really notably does not use the word Islamophobia. I think even these kind of cloth-eared people in power have recognized that that's become a very problematic word because it conflated criticism of Islam with bigotry against Muslims. So they've scrapped that word, but anti-Muslim hostility, it turns out, is the same thing. And if you read the definition, it is very much about because as people have pointed out, it is against the law in the UK to incite hatred against Muslims or to discriminate against Muslims, as it should be. All social groups should be protected from discrimination. I think most decent people agree with that. But this definition goes beyond those protections and talks about the problem of hostility, feeling hostile towards Muslims or certain ways in which Muslims present themselves. And if you look at the definition, it talks about words, written or spoken words that might feel intimidating or which might stereotype Muslims. Now, most people agree it's not big or clever to stereotype entire groups in society. But, what if a comedian takes the piss out of the niqab? Or what about that old Boris Johnson newspaper column in which he said women in the burqa look like bank robbers and letterboxes? That might have been seen as intimidating commentary, which stereotyped Muslims on the basis of their appearance. All of those things in this new definition are defined as bad things. And it will have a chilling effect on speech, even though it's not a law, and even though people will not be dragged to court to answer for their blasphemous speech. It will have a top-down effect in institutions, and I think it will have a chilling effect on how people think and speak about this religion. So it is a blasphemy law by the back door. They've just got rid of the word Islamophobia and replaced it with something else. And as you say, Fraser, we need complete freedom to talk about radical Islam, Islamism, the impact that ideology is having in certain communities, among certain constituencies. We need an Islamism a strategy rather than an Islamophobia strategy. We need a government that is devoted to wheedling out not anti-Muslim hostility, but the anti-Western hostility, the anti-British hostility that has taken hold amongst certain sections of society. And because it's incapable of doing that or unwilling to do that, instead it just brings back this Islamophobia policing. I think it's a depressing sign of the times that the government is focusing on tackling so-called blasphemy rather than tackling real extremism in our societies.
And I think, we've already seen signs that it has emboldened those who would want to silence blasphemy. I mean, it was interesting. One of the Gaza independent MPs stood up in Parliament to ask, will his fellow members of Parliament be sanctioned if they engage in anti-Muslim hostility? So immediately he interpreted it as an attack on free speech. There was a Lib Dem peer who said that anyone who says that the anti-Muslim hostility definition goes against free speech is spreading misinformation. And then she added, misinformation is a crime under the Online Safety Act, and said that people should be arrested, therefore, if they say that this definition counts as free speech online. So certainly the enemies of free speech are even if they protest that it's nothing to do with censorship, they've been emboldened. Paul, what have you made of this whole episode?
Gratuitous abuse of people on the basis of their religion is obviously not a very nice thing, but I think it's clear that there are genuine, well-founded fears that this definition has the potential to stifle legitimate scrutiny of Islam as a religion and some of the customs and practices related to Islam, and to turn in effectively to a backdoor blasphemy law, where a culture will be created whereby people will just feel that it's a safer bet simply to button their lip in any discussion or debate about Islam or Muslims rather than expressing their true beliefs. And that's not a good position for any society to get itself into. And yes, while the government says, look, this is non-statutory and it's simply a guidance tool for the public and private sector, for councils, for public services, for businesses, and so on. The truth is that many of these institutions are completely obsessed with DEI ideology. Let's be blunt about it. And the people that run many of these institutions have that kind of metropolitan liberal worldview, where they do see any criticism, legitimate criticism of Islam or scrutiny of the customs of Islam, or the behavior of certain Muslims as intolerant. They see anything like that as an attack on multiculturalism, which of course most of them are signed up to, and they will take a very dim view of it. And what we'll see, even if we don't see prosecutions, there's a possibility we will see people who fall foul of this definition, because some people will in these institutions, let's be blunt, cancelled or sacked or denied promotion, denied employment in the first place. That's the real danger that we get ourselves into. And of course, we absolutely defend, or certainly those of us who believe in liberty, defend the principle of freedom of religion. But as Brendan said, look, the law prevents harassment or discrimination on the grounds of religion at the moment. So this kind of bolt-on, as it were, doesn't seem necessary. And you can, we saw with the grooming gangs exactly what happens when people are fearful of raising issues around Islam and around its customs, because they are worried about inflaming community tensions, as many people in authority were, and as a result declined to raise issues when they should have done. We saw the effects of that. We don't need to repeat what happened. Suffice to say that thousands of young girls suffered at the hands of predators because of that culture of silence. And I fear genuinely that culture of silence will be exacerbated as a result of the introduction of this definition.
Brendan, is there anything you want to add before we finish on this?
Well, just thinking about the past couple of weeks since the explosion of the Iran war, I mean, we've seen evidence in our societies that we're quite divided. We 4 men had been arrested in London on suspicion of spying on Jewish institutions for the Islamic Republic. We've seen people on the streets chanting "Death to Israel." The Al-Quds March, we know that that's been banned, but apparently they plan to march anyway. We've seen expressions of what I would call anti-Western hostility. By the way, I defend people's right to express anti-Western hostility. I don't defend people's right to spy on behalf of a foreign nation, but I do defend people's right to march in the streets and say these things. But they are indicative of a problem in our society. And the worst thing about censorship always is that it prevents us from being honest about the problems we face. It really discourages us from being frank and open and free and outspoken about the problems in our society. And instead, it brushes everything under the carpet. And this kind of censorious approach to Islam will have the exact same impact. It will make it much more difficult for us to talk about the fraying of our so-called multicultural society, the rise of these regressive trends in certain constituencies, and it will make it harder for us to tackle it. So censorship is always a bad thing. It's always a barrier to social progress and free debate. And I think it's going to be in this case as well.